always thought betrayal would be loud, screaming, crying, doors slamming. But the night it happened to me, it was silent. I walked into my house and saw boxes that weren't mine. Shoes by the door I'd never seen before. A suitcase leaning against my wall like it had every right to be there. My mother had used her emergency key to move my unemployed sister into my home while I was gone. No call, no warning, no permission. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Called 911. 2 days later she came back, this time with a locksmith. My name is Marianne Holloway. I'm 30 years old and I work in property management and asset evaluation. My job taught me something early on that most people learn too late. Ownership isn't emotional, it's structural. Clear lines, clear rules. That mindset didn't come from ambition. Came from survival. I didn't grow up in a loud household. There were no explosive fights, no dramatic ultimatums. What we had was quieter and harder to name. My mother, Evelyn Holloway, always framed control as concern. Every question felt like a check-in. Every suggestion felt like instruction. And every pause carried an expectation I was supposed to sense without it ever being said out loud. I learned young that peace didn't come from honesty. Came from compliance, from choosing the right tone, from not pushing back too hard. Corinne, my younger sister, grew up differently. Where I learned to stand on my own, she learned to wait. Wait for help. Wait for something to change. Wait for someone else to solve the problem. She drifted from one unstable situation to another. Always close enough to see what I built. Never close enough to understand what it cost. By the time I bought my house in Westbridge City, I didn't tell anyone at first. Not because I wasn't proud, but because pride felt dangerous in a family where success quietly rearranged the power balance. The house wasn't big or flashy, but it was mine. Every payment, every bill, every decision. When I finally gave my mother a spare key, I was very clear. I didn't soften it with jokes or reassurance. I told her that key was for real emergencies only. Not visits, not convenience, not decisions made on my behalf. If I was unreachable and something serious happened, she could use it. Otherwise, that door stayed closed. She listened quietly, nodded once, said nothing. At the time, I mistook silence for understanding. A few months later, the tone started shifting. My mother came by more often, not to spend time with me, but to walk through my space. Her eyes lingered on rooms instead of photos. She opened doors I usually kept closed. She stood in the hallway longer than necessary. Once, while looking into the spare room, she said gently, "No one should live alone in a place like this." It didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like preparation. Then a relative mentioned casually that Corinne no longer had stable housing. Corinne never told me herself. She never asked for help. She never called. And that's when the pressure started feeling heavier. Like something was already moving toward me quietly without my consent. The work trip wasn't supposed to feel rushed. I had inspections lined up across Greyhaven County. Long days walking through properties that all smelled faintly of dust and fresh paint. It was familiar, predictable, safe. But by the second night, something sat heavy in my chest. The kind of unease that doesn't have words yet. I told myself it was stress. I finished early and drove home without telling anyone. The house looked normal from the outside. Lights off, quiet street, nothing broken. That almost fooled me. The moment I opened the door, the air felt wrong. Not dirty. Not chaotic. Just occupied. There were boxes stacked neatly along the wall. Not rushed. Not temporary. Shoes by the door that weren't mine lined up carefully, like someone wanted them to belong there. A faint scent of a different detergent hung in the hallway, sharp and unfamiliar. I stepped inside slowly, every sound louder than it should have been. The living room was the same but not. My book shifted. The throw pillow angled differently. The spare space I kept intentionally empty was no longer empty. That's when Corinne walked out of the guest room. She didn't look surprised. No flinch. No apology. She looked settled. Comfortable. Like someone who had already unpacked emotionally, even if the boxes were still closed. I asked her what she was doing in my house. My voice stayed calm, but it felt tight, like I was holding something back with both hands. She shrugged lightly and said that our mother told her it was already handled. That sentence landed heavier than anything else she could have said. It explained everything without explaining anything at all. I walked past her down the hallway. Drawers had been rearranged. Closet space shifted. The guest room had been turned into something intentional, not a crash landing plan. Bedding smooth. Her bag tucked into the corner like it had been measured for the space. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Not panic. Not shock. Recognition. The emergency key. The one meant for disasters. The one I had defined clearly. It hadn't been borrowed. Had been used. Corinne moved through the house like she belonged there, touching counters, adjusting small things, speaking casually about where she might put her desk. She didn't ask. She assumed. I realized then that this wasn't about her needing help. It was about access. About my mother deciding that my boundaries were suggestions, not rules. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain my feelings. Because feelings don't mean anything when a line has already been crossed. I stood in my own living room and understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't temporary. And it wasn't going to resolve itself if I stayed quiet. By the time I went to bed that night, I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't act, my home would stop being mine in ways I might not be able to undo. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind kept replaying the same realization over and over again. Silence had trained them. Every time I let something slide to keep the peace, it taught them that my space was flexible, negotiable, available. The next morning, I asked my mother to come over. When she arrived, she walked in like nothing was wrong, like this was just another family conversation she could steer with tone and timing. Corinne stayed close, quiet, her presence heavy without words. I didn't sit. I stood in the living room and spoke slowly, carefully. I told my mother that ownership wasn't emotional. It wasn't something blood could override. I reminded her what the emergency key was for. Not visits, not convenience, not decisions made in my absence. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that tries to calm a situation without actually changing anything. She talked about family, about responsibility, about how I had space and Corinne didn't, as if those facts automatically rearranged the law. Corinne added a few words. Careful ones. She said it was temporary. She said she just needed time. She didn't ask. She framed it like a favor already granted. I listened until the room felt too tight to breathe in. Then I said one sentence that changed everything. You don't have permission to be here. The air shifted immediately. My mother's voice hardened. Not loud but sharp. She told me I was overreacting. That I was being dramatic. That no one was hurting me. That's when I realized something important. They weren't confused. They were confident. Confident that I would eventually bend. Picked up my phone. My hand didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I told the operator that people were inside my home without my consent and refused to leave. Saying it out loud felt surreal, like translating a private nightmare into something official. When the officers arrived, everything slowed down. Their questions were neutral. Their movements measured. They asked for identification. They looked at documents. They listened. My mother tried to explain. Tried to soften it. Tried to reframe it as a family misunderstanding. One officer explained calmly that family didn't cancel property rights. That entering without permission was trespassing. There were no handcuffs. No raised voices. Just a formal warning and a clear instruction to leave. As they walked out, I thought that would be the end of it. Not because I trusted my mother to accept boundaries, but because I believed the seriousness of the moment would force understanding. After the door closed, the house felt hollow. Bigger. Too quiet. I sat on the edge of the couch and waited for relief to arrive. Didn't. What I felt instead was something colder. A certainty that this wasn't over. That being warned wasn't the same as being stopped. That some people don't retreat when confronted. They regroup. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against my front door. The sound wasn't loud enough to be dramatic. That's what made it worse. Metal scraped softly against metal, slow and deliberate, like someone working carefully instead of forcing anything. I lay still in bed for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, listening. The sound came again. Precise. Intentional. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up. I reached for my phone without turning on the light and opened the security app. The porch camera feed loaded instantly, washed in the pale glow of the motion sensor. My mother stood inches from my front door. Her posture was relaxed, arms loosely folded. Not rushed, not nervous. Beside her, a man I didn't recognize crouched near the lock. A small black case open at his knees. Thin metal tools moved confidently in his hands, sliding into my lock like this was routine, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. That was the moment fear finally arrived. Not panic, not chaos, something colder. The kind of fear that tells you this isn't an emotional problem anymore. This is a safety one. My mother leaned closer to him, said something I couldn't hear. Her face didn't change. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't pleading. She was waiting. I moved slowly down the hallway, careful with every step so the floor wouldn't betray me. I stopped far enough from the door to stay unseen, but close enough to feel the vibration each time his tools scraped the lock. The sound felt invasive, personal, like fingers where they didn't belong. Called 911. This time I didn't hesitate. I gave my city and explained that someone was actively attempting to enter my home without consent. My voice was steady, almost detached. The operator asked who the person outside was. Saying the word "my mother" out loud felt heavier than anything else that morning. The operator told me to stay on the line. I stayed quiet, listening to the scraping grow more confident. The man adjusted his grip. The metal clicked softly. Red and blue lights flooded the porch before I heard the sirens. Everything happened fast after that. Commands cut through the quiet street. Amplified. The man froze, then dropped his tools. Officers ordered him to the ground. His cheek pressed against the concrete, hands behind his back. My mother was pulled away from the door. One officer held her arm firmly while another spoke into a radio. There was no friendly tone this time. No warnings dressed as advice. Everything moved with a weight that hadn't been there 2 days earlier. I stayed inside. I didn't open the door. I watched everything through the camera feed as paperwork came out. Pens moved. Radios crackled. My mother spoke with frustration, not shame. She gestured toward the door like she still believed this was something she could explain away. I realized then that the first incident hadn't scared her. It had offended her. She didn't think she was wrong. She thought she'd been inconvenienced. After the lights faded and the street returned to silence, I stood alone in my hallway for a long time. My hands shook once the adrenaline wore off. When I finally sat down, my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for days. I didn't feel victorious. Felt alert. A week later I understood why. I was clearing out the last of the things Corinne had left behind. Not to preserve them. To erase them. I needed my house to feel like mine again. Every drawer. Every corner. In the back of a hallway closet, behind a stack of folded blankets, I found a thin cardboard box I didn't recognize. Inside was an envelope. Not mine. Heavier than it looked. The papers inside carried my name. My address. Clauses about long-term residency. References to shared bills. Permission to occupy. My signature was at the bottom. It wasn't my handwriting. I sat on the floor and stared at the pages until the words blurred. This wasn't overstepping. This wasn't entitlement. This was strategy. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer named Caleb Mercer. He didn't react dramatically. He read slowly, carefully. His jaw tightened with each page. He explained that if documents like these were ever filed, even partially, someone could argue legal permission had been granted. That disputes like this didn't get solved quickly. They dragged through courts. Drain time. drained money, drained peace. He told me silence was the most dangerous response in situations like this. That night, something inside me hardened into clarity. I stopped responding to messages. I didn't explain myself. I didn't argue. With Caleb's guidance, I started building a legal wall around my life. Formal notices, clear records, documentation that couldn't be twisted quietly. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. The administrative review moved slowly, methodically. No shouting, no family drama, just forms, hearings, verification. The second police report changed everything. It established pattern, intent. When the decision came, it wasn't loud. My mother faced formal penalties and was legally prohibited from approaching or interfering with any property connected to my name. Corinne was barred from attempting to establish residency and left the city quietly soon after. I didn't follow where she went. I didn't need to. Back at home, I replaced every lock, reinforced every entry point. Cameras covered angles I'd never thought I'd need. Access became singular, controlled. The house felt different after that. Not warmer, not softer, safer. For a long time I believed family meant tolerance. That patience was proof of love. I learned something else. Unprotected empathy teaches people how far they can go. And some people won't stop until the door is locked for good. The quiet that followed wasn't the kind people talk about when they mean peace. It was sharper, clean. Like a room after everything unnecessary has been cleared out. I spent the next few days putting my house back together. Not just physically, deliberately. I wiped down surfaces that had been touched without permission. I reorganized drawers that had been rearranged. Each small action felt like reclaiming something that had been taken quietly. That's when I found the paperwork again. Pages with my name, my address, language about long-term occupancy, mentions of shared payments and ongoing bills. A signature that looked close enough to pass at a glance, but wrong in every way that mattered. I didn't panic. I didn't confront anyone. I took it straight back to Caleb. He confirmed what I already suspected. This hadn't been emotional. It had been calculated. If those documents had gone any further, my life could have shifted in ways that would take years to untangle. He helped me file formal protections, create a paper trail that couldn't be rewritten later, close every door that had been left vulnerable. The outcome wasn't dramatic. There were no apologies. No reconciliation speeches. My mother received administrative sanctions and a clear legal restriction. Corinne had no path left to stay nearby. Distance did the rest. Changed the locks. Updated the security system. Registered everything properly. Every access point. Every permission. Every boundary existed in writing. Now the house felt smaller afterward. Not because I'd lost something. Because it finally belonged to me again. I used to believe protecting yourself meant disappointing people you love. Now I know it means refusing to disappear inside someone else's expectations. Family doesn't get a free pass to erase your boundaries. Blood doesn't override consent. And peace doesn't come from staying quiet while your life is being rearranged. If you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else would, you're not wrong for that. You're not alone. If this story resonated, share your experience in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next.